Hey friends, welcome to the Astrology of Murder podcast. I'm your host, Courtney, aka the Cosmic Owl. Thank you for joining me today. And we put a poll out a couple of days ago asking which serial killer that y'all would like for us to do for me to do a podcast about. And I think that they all got pretty much equal votes. So I decided to start with Ted Bundy, or I decided to do this video on Ted Bundy today. Now, keeping in mind that your astrology chart doesn't make you a serial killer, your choices do. And the number one link I found after all the years of studying criminal and forensic astrology is terrible parenting, is a fracture in the parental relationship or an abusive parent. And so the message of the day is to love your kids. You do not have to be perfect, but you do have to be there, and you do need to provide a solid foundation for your child to grow, and a solid emotional support foundation for them to develop, and they need to feel loved for them to grow and develop and live up to their best potential. When you were an abusive parent, you're running the risk of creating a monster for your child and unleashing that monster on society. So love your children. Okay, so one of the interesting things about Ted Bundy is I decided to do his chart. There's several factors going on. First off, he's probably got one of the worst charts in astrology that I've ever seen in all of astrology. He was born on November 24th, 1946. His dad, there's a big secrecy about his father. And after doing some deep digging on this, some deep research on who Ted Bundy's father was, I've arrived at the conclusion that Ted Bundy's father was most likely his actual grandfather. I think that the grandfather or the father of Ted Bundy's mother, who was a wonderful woman, from what research shows and all the evidence that I've found, was a really good person. And unfortunately, she got a bad, hand dealt to her in her life. So the thing about Ted Bundy's life was that, so he was raised, they sent her off to live somewhere else, like in a Catholic, covenant or whatever it's called, where pregnant women go. And so after she had Ted Bundy, she brought the baby home, and her parents pretended like he was their child, and that his real mother was his sister. Well, the father was extremely abusive. So around the age of 5 or 6 years old, and it could have been, give a year or take a year, his mother, with the help of some neighbors and some friends, helped her escape the abusive home, because the father was being abusive to Ted as well. So she took Ted and she fled to Washington State. And it's at that time that she revealed to Ted that she was actually his mother and not his sister. So if you can imagine being in that situation and finding out that your whole life has been a lie, that your parents are not really your parents, your sister's not really your sister's your mother, and now you never see your parents again, really. I think he's seen them once or twice, or his grandparents, and he's off living, and he was very close to who he thought his father, and I think was his actual father. And so she moves out there, meets a wonderful man, and marries him. And he adopts Ted, and that's how Ted got the Bundy last name. So there is a major fracture going on in Ted's early childhood development, because remember, your moon sign is the sign that's going to show your childhood conditioning. Your wounds are stored in your emotional center. So when we get into his chart, you're going to understand why this affected him so much. And he never bonded with his adopted father. He never bonded with his siblings that he had, that his mother, I think her name might have been Louise, that she had following, after she had Ted, and with her husband that she stayed married with I guess for the rest of her life. So this was a very strong wound indeed. And then given the fact that, if I'm correct, and I think that there's a couple of other people that feel the same way, a couple of other researchers, that this is his father, his grandfather. And I mean, he is a spitting image of his grandfather. There was one picture, if you go digging really deep on the internet, there is one picture that you can find with him, with his grandfather, and the resemblance is striking. So there can be some genetic, some genetic mess ups in his makeup altogether. And this can be, when you're talking about, incestuous and this, relationship and this type of interbreeding, and allows an evil to come in to the world, and there's just a darkness that it messes up a person's genetic makeup. And so therefore you're going to run the risk of producing a child that of a sociopathic or psychopathic nature. Okay, so once again, keeping in mind, this is not for all the people, all the woke people that want to get offended by everything and you take things personally. If you if you have the same aspect that I'm going to be talking about in this video, do not take it personal, because this is the blending of a person's the totality of a chart. Everything is a wheel in the middle of a wheel, and so it's blending all this together, and the combination of life, of the factors in life and early childhood development that created this monster that we know today as Ted Bundy. And with that being said, let's get started. So Ted Bundy was born at the new moon on November 24th, 1946. He was also born during the Saros eclipse cycle, meaning his sun and his moon were both conjunct his south node, and he was born, I'm pretty sure he was born during an eclipse as well. He has sun and moon in Sagittarius and Mercury and Scorpio retrograde. Now, his ascendant, which is your physical body, it is the vehicle that carries you throughout life. It's your public face. It's the way other people see you. He has Leo rising. So his chart ruler, which is the planet that rules the sign that's ascending, is the sun, and it falls in the fourth house of stellium. The fourth house is an axis house, and it is the house of final endings. Okay, it is the house of your home, but it's also the house of final endings, and therefore you can look at this house as a death house. So the crazy thing about his chart is he has Scorpio ruling that house cusp. He has the stellium is 3 or more planets in one house. He has Venus, Mercury, the sun, Mars, and moon, and the moon in this house. The ruler of this house is falling in the 12th house of hidden things, secret sorrows. This is a house of a mystic too, but given the fact that this is Pluto that we're talking about, which rules death itself, that's ruling the house of final endings, falling in the house of secrets and sorrows and things that are hidden from you. It's with Saturn, and Saturn is stationary in his chart. Now, Saturn does rule the father in your chart. And so having a stationary Saturn. Now, what is a stationary planet? You've heard of Mercury retrograde. That's probably the most popular, retrograde motion, the planet that people talk about, because it affects the mail, it affects messages, communication, phones. So a stationary planet and a retrograde planet, when a planet is in direct motion, it means that the way that Earth is moving past that planet, it appears the planet is moving forward as well. When a planet is in retrograde motion, it doesn't mean that the planet is moving backwards. What it means is that the planet, the way Earth is moving past that planet, it appears that the planet is moving backwards. Now, it does affect things. So when you're born with a retrograde planet, and Ted Bundy was born with Mercury retrograde, so it introverts the energies. See, when you took your first breath, a snapshot was imprinted on you of where the planets were. And the planets are God's organizational system, or the universes, or whatever supreme being you believe in. This is the structure of the universe, and this is the organizational system. Each planet presides over a different function of your overall being. So from the time you took your first breath, a snapshot was imprinted on you. And so this become your chakras or your energy system. Now, when a planet is in direct motion, the energy has an extroverted expression. Okay, so the energy is coming from within, and it has an expression that is going outward to the world. So when a planet is retrograde, it introverts that expression. So the planet has a harder time with the expression. So people that are born with Mercury retrograde in their charts, there's a lot of miscommunication. They can be born tongue-tied. They can have speech impediments, speech delays, but at bare minimum, what they think, because Mercury is how you think, it's your mind, it's the computer programmer running everything. It's the way you communicate, the way you receive communication. It's the way you see the world. Very important planet. So when that's retrograde, when your mind is introverted like that, your thoughts never come out the way that you intend them to. So you feel very misunderstood from early on. And if a person with Mercury retrograde is ever interrupted, they have a harder time, like getting back focused and getting that expression to come out the way that they want it to. So usually there's a shutdown. So parents, if you have a child, or if you have, adults, if you have like a spouse or somebody that has Mercury retrograde, you need to give them time to speak and be conscious that you're not interrupting them. Okay, so a stationary planet. Now, this is a rare phenomenon in a chart. I don't see it very often. I'm going to say about 2 to 3% of the charts that I do and that I've researched. And so this is a focal point of a chart. If you want to know if you have a stationary planet in your chart, go to astro.com. You can set up a free account with them, and you can do, their extended chart. But under the free charts that you can get from astro.com, it's not going to be listed in the extended chart selection for all of my budding astrologers out there. To find out if you have a stationary planet, you're going to go to the personality or the personal free horoscope charts. And you're going to click on the, I think it's like the personality one or personal one. And you're going to scroll down to the bottom, and you're going to look and see if there is an S beside any of your planets. And if there is an S, it means that planet is stationary. That's going to be the easiest way for you to figure out if you have a stationary. It's very important to understand if you do, or to dive in and look at this, because it doesn't matter what sign or that you are, sun, moon, rising. If you have a stationary planet in your chart, it is the focal point of your chart. Everything is interpreted to that planet. So if you have an astrology chart that doesn't sound like you, definitely check for a stationary planet in your chart, because that could be what's going on. So we have the stationary Saturn. Now, what is Saturn in a chart? Now, this is in Ted's chart, where the ruler of the house of final endings is Pluto, that rules the sign of death itself, is falling in the 12th house of secret sorrows, self-undoing. It is the house of the past life, and it is conjunct Saturn in this house that is stationary. So Pluto is with stationary Saturn in the 12th house. So this is a focal point of Ted Bundy's chart. So Saturn is your father. Saturn being in this house with Pluto, there's some serious karmic link with this being the house of the past lives with the father. And so looking at his chart, he has Cancer ruling his 12th house cusp, and the moon is with Mars. So you look at the ruler of the houses. So the ruler of his house of secret sorrows is the moon. So we're going to find out what house that this moon is falling in, and it is falling in the 4th house. So when the moon is with Mars, there can be a very destructive energy, okay? A very destructive energy coming forth. I do believe this is a chart of someone who is demonically possessed. Everything is lined up. His stellium is in a water house. He's got a water sign on the water house. It is Scorpio. And the crazy thing about this is that he has so many homicidal degrees in his chart. So there's like a, you know, an area you can look up CEO Carter's Encyclopedia of Psychological Astrology, and he breaks down a lot of these degrees, but this is like a deeper hidden meaning of someone's chart. So when you see some of these degrees popping off like this, so for instance, he's got the 16th degree of Taurus at his midheaven, which is the highest point in his chart. It's where he's headed. And so this puts the 16th degree of Scorpio on the lowest point in his chart. And this is a degree of asphyxiation, a degree of hanging, a degree of throat injuries. And this is fixed sign energy. He, with his Venus is also, his Mercury is on what's considered, it's a half a degree from being conjunct a homicidal degree. The 25th degree of Scorpio is considered a homicidal degree. So it doesn't mean that everybody that has the 25th degree of Scorpio is homicidal, but what it does mean is the intensity of the energy, okay? The intensity of the energy, and what you feed will grow and what you starve will die. So what is Mercury and Scorpio? How do Mercury and Scorpio think? Well, I always tell people who have prominent Scorpios in their chart, you know, their Achilles heel is going to be pornography. And if you listen to Ted Bundy's final interview, and he talks about how this is something that grew out of control. Now, was he scapegoating pornography? I have no idea. But I do know that this is the sign that gets addicted to sex, and there can be a fracture in developing a spiritual connection with other people because there can be too much emphasis on sex in general. So the fact that his Mercury or his mind is conjunct this or is on this 25th degree is going to intensify the sexual appetite, is going to intensify his desires and the lustful, his fetishes and things like that. Whatever he focuses on is just like so intense, it almost just like grips him. So we have Venus at the 21st degree. Now, Venus is also retrograde. Okay, so when Venus is retrograde in a chart, people feel that have Venus retrograde like they're never loved. They can never be loved enough. They don't feel like people love them. And it's a secret sorrow that they have. And it can come out as almost as they can have a sense of entitlement, or they can have too much ego, or they can appear to have too much ego. But that's just like a mask for how they really feel on the inside. So really positive affirmations for Venus retrograde in a natal chart is what is needed. And so that the love can come from within, and you're not seeking, your self-worth is not getting tied up in other people. So Venus, we've got Mercury on a critical degree, Venus on a critical degree, the moon at the 17th degree of Sagittarius is on a critical degree, and the sun and the moon are in the same sign, meaning he was born at a new moon. What does that mean? It means that he has a harder time self-reflecting. People that are born at a new moon have a harder time seeing the error in their ways. If you're listening to this and you were born at a new moon, I'm sorry to have to speak the truth, but you really need to turn within, and you need to reflect on what other people around you tell you about your behavior, because it's not natural for you to. It's not natural for you to self-reflect. You have to consciously redirect and consciously make this change in yourself. So, okay, so Saturn is at 8 degrees Leo retrograde. So when Saturn ruling the father, and this is a critical degree in astrology as well. He obviously is on the karmic treadmill. Now, what does that mean? Someone born with a preponderance of fixed signs in their chart are said to be born in karmic astrology or past life astrology. We call this the karmic treadmill, meaning they repeat the same mistakes over and over and over and over. It's almost like an insanity placing, and they keep expecting a different outcome, and it's harder for them to stop their behavior. Once the wheel gets rolling, they're like on a hamster wheel that they just can't get off of. They can get off of it, and it's going to be through divine intervention and just sheer intestinal fortitude. But once forward momentum starts for people like this, so if they start out early in life with bad, toxic, sneaky behavior, and we know that Scorpio is a very private sign, and someone that has Mercury and Venus conjunct in Scorpio they're going to think about sex a lot. Okay. Scorpio is the sign that rules sex. And remember what I'm always telling you, people act more like their Mercury sign than they do their sun sign. So Sagittarius is a mutable energy. Okay. It's a bendable energy. The mutable signs are more likely to change. The fixed signs are less likely to change. So it's harder for them to get off the hamster wheel when you see that's why we call it the karmic treadmill. So we have the 8th degree of Saturn, which rules his father, retrograde on this critical degree in the house of secrets. And this is, this is in the same house that rules his chart ruler, that houses his chart ruler, the sun. So this is in the house of secrets. This is why I'm telling you, I think his grandfather was actually his father. And when you see the retrograde Saturn in a chart, most of the time you're going to see a separation from your father, from who you thought your father was at bare minimum. Or you're going to also, the father, you feel like the father rejected you or just was not around, even if he stayed married, even if your parents stayed married. When you see retrograde Saturn, there's a fracture in the relationship with the father at bare minimum. Okay, so Jupiter is also in Scorpio. So we have Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. Now, what happens with Jupiter? What does Jupiter do? Jupiter is like your good luck planet. Jupiter is expansive. Jupiter, it's your easy karmic lessons. But what happens when it's in Scorpio and when it's conjunct Venus and conjunct Mercury? Jupiter expands everything it touches, okay? It expands anything that you're feeding, anything you're fixated on. So for Ted Bundy, he was fixated on power. He was fixated on murder and rape. Now, one of the things that this is going to demonstrate, I want to talk to you a little bit about what motivated Ted Bundy. This is probably one of the most fascinating things about his chart and his life story that always gets glossed over. But this is going to be a perfect example of the Scorpio energy of his mind. Now, Ted Bundy fell in love with a girl, right out of high school, and he was kind of a loser. Like, he stayed at home playing games, like he didn't have any ambition. I think he had quit his job, and his girlfriend realized she's dating a big man child. So she broke up with him. She had grown and she was evolving into adulthood, and he was not. And so and you can see how, when this happens, you have to part ways. You can't let other people hold you down. She give him chance after chance, but at the end of the day, she didn't want to be his mommy. So she breaks up with him. So keeping in mind, Scorpio is the most vindictive sign of the zodiac. It doesn't matter if somebody with Scorpio, they're not going to get you back immediately. They think revenge is best served on a cold dish. So this is probably one of the most ultimate, this is probably the ultimate Mercury and Scorpio plotting revenge stories out there. Because in the reality, I think really what motivated Ted Bundy to go on this killing spree was he wanted to get his ex-girlfriend back. So what does he do? Ted Bundy enrolls in college and he excels at the top of his class. He gets accepted into law school. He is rubbing elbows with congressmen, with senators. And so when all this happens, he's in law school. He woos his ex-girlfriend back. He just happens to bump into her, and he sweeps her off her feet. He's the man that she wanted him to evolve into all those years ago. So he spent all these years going to college, perfecting his charm and all this in a need to get back and to get his ex-girlfriend back, so that he could then, a year later, when she falls head over heels in love with him, thinks that she's going to marry him. He introduces her to congressmen, to senators, and it's looking like he's going to go somewhere. He's at the top of his class. He breaks up with her and then goes on a killing spree and doesn't finish his final little stint there at law school. And he tells her that he did all that just to get her back. I mean, years of this, that was his motivation. If that's not the ultimate, the darkest and the most extreme of the Scorpio vindictiveness, I don't know what is. But I mean, imagine if he would have, if he, that kind of a brilliant mind, if he would have just redirected it somewhere else. I mean, there were even judges that were sorry that they had to sentence this child killer. He killed over 30 people, and he said that it could be upwards to 100. And I wouldn't be surprised. And I mean, his final victim was a little girl. I think she was 12 years old. And that's what he rode the lightning for in Florida. And that was what he could not talk about in his final interview. He didn't want to talk about that evil that he did. He didn't want to, he couldn't even get it to come out of his mouth. He killed a little girl. I mean, everybody he killed was innocent, but he killed like a little girl in a very evil way. So we have the 25th degree of Leo rising. This is a homicidal degree. This is the 25th degree of a fixed sign. There has been, research done on this. This degree is not a good degree when you have the fixed energy on it. And Pluto being with the stationary planet, in his 12th house, ruling his 4th house of final endings. So we have the ruler of the first is in the 4th house of final endings under and Scorpio is ruling the house cusp. We have Virgo ruling the 2nd house cusp with Neptune in this house. Now, what is the 2nd house? The 2nd house is your house of possessions. It's also your house of values. It's your house of your self-respect. You can see how you're going to acquire money through this house and things like that, but he has Neptune. And the significance of this house is that it forms the opposition to the 8th house of like sex, of occult, of things that are like, sex, occult, your partner's resources and things like that. So with Neptune forming this opposition here, he had some very sneaky sexual perversions and tendencies. I'm sure if you can take the totality of the rest of his chart. Now, the 3rd house cusp, but the ruler of that house, where is it falling? In the 4th house of final endings. The 3rd house has Libra on it with Chiron, and Jupiter is in this house. It is leading the stellium going into the 4th house. Now, Chiron being in this house shows that there's a deep wound around a sibling. Obviously, the deep wound was his mother that he thought was his sibling. And this is a wound that he never got over. Mercury and Scorpio people cannot stand to be betrayed or to be lied to. And if you ever do it, if you ever break the trust and you ever lie to someone with Mercury and Scorpio, it's like an act of Congress to get it back. They are resentful and they hate you for it and they do not trust you. So you can see how this brooded, but he really loved her as his sister. But as his mother, there was a resentfulness. That lie was a huge fracture in his whole world. What could he ever trust again? His Mercury's in Scorpio. His whole life was a lie. His whole foundation was a lie. He never trusted anybody again, and that contributed to the making of the notorious serial killer that we still research today. So we have the ruler of the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd so far falling in the 4th house of final endings with Scorpio, the sign that rules death itself, ruling that house cusp, falling in the 12th house of secret sorrows with stationary Saturn. So the ruler of the 4th, Pluto, is falling in the 12th house. The ruler of the 5th is Jupiter. The 5th house is, and this is where he was brilliant with the law, because the Sagittarius energy is very gifted with law and arguing and seeing both sides and lobbying and debating. They kind of like to argue. Jupiter is about being just and righteous and all that. So Jupiter, the ruler of his 5th house, this is one of the reasons he was so charming, besides the fact that he had Leo rising, was the 5th house, the house of romance. Now he was so good looking and charming that his victims willingly got into the car to go with him or wanted to help him out. They never saw it coming. And so he was lucky with traveling and things like that. And that's Jupiter going to be in the 3rd house. 3rd house rules your short distance traveling, and it's a learning house and it's a communication house. So he really this amps up the charm factor of getting your ideas expressed and things like that and speaking eloquently, which he did. So the 6th house, the ruler of the 6th house is your house of the way it's your house of work, it's your house of health, it's your day-to-day activities, it's hygiene. The ruler of his 6th house is Saturn, and it's in the 12th house. So when you see this link up, there can be, you can look to see that if it's the moon or if it's Saturn, that they're the parental figure, the moon being the mother. If you have Cancer on this house cusp and Capricorn, which would be Saturn on this house cusp, that the father, you've got heavy karma, but they're detrimental to your mental health. Very detrimental to your mental health, which his father / probably grandfather was. Now, the ruler of his 7th house of other people is Uranus, and this is in his 10th house with his North Node. Now, your North Node is where you're headed in life. It's your soul, what you're supposed to be developing in this life. So the nodes of the moon don't work as good, or they're at their fall or debilitation in Gemini and Sagittarius, which his were, and everything's conjunct his South Node. He had the North Node in Gemini, meaning there was an energy that he was born with, a darkness. It was almost like he was born evil, and had this darkness from birth on him. And then you can see the compounding, like contributing factors and the betrayals during childhood that happened, and the abuse from his father. But Uranus in the North Node at the 10th house. And so his where he was headed in life was very unstable. And he would leave his mark on the world and shake things up, and it probably not in a very good manner, especially with the 16th degree of Taurus ruling his midheaven, which rules decapitations, and it rules like asphyxiation, your issues with strangulation, throat, things like that. Pisces is ruling his 8th house cusp. Now, he was very fantasy driven sexually. You can look to the 8th house and you can see how someone expresses their sexual energy. And when Neptune is in this house, these people can be addicted to pornography very easily, especially with the fact that his Neptune is in his 2nd house. The 2nd house is a house of overindulgence in anything that feels good. Food, shopping, clothing, just everything is kind of overindulged. So the ruler of your house of sex falling in this house, you're going to overindulge in sex. So the 9th house of the higher mind, it is the house of gets publishing. It's a politician's house. It's like the law of attraction is Mars. And this is falling with the moon and the rest of the stellium in the house of final endings. The ruler of the 10th house falling in the house of final endings with the rest of the stellium, it is Taurus. So that's Venus ruling it. And when moon and Mars are together, y'all, that can be a very destructive placing. There's a very subconscious destruction that can come out, that you have to redirect this energy. At bare minimum, moon and Mars together in a chart in the same house, there is a lot of heat and a lot of anger in the body. That you need a physical outlet to work out. Like, you need to get this energy. You were born with too much energy. The ruler of the 11th house falling in the 4th house of final endings with Scorpio of death, final endings, and the ruler of the 12th house falling in the final house of final endings. So pretty much all of Ted Bundy's chart is falling in this house of final endings. I would 80% of it. And that ruler is falling with conjunct his Saturn that rules secret sorrows, self-undoing, the Saturn stationary, Saturn and Pluto together, very evil father in this house, ruling that house cusp. Everything is tied back to his family lineage. And that's why I think that he was also a product of interbreeding and of an incestuous rape. So that is my synopsis of Ted Bundy. And like I said, when my co-host comes on, we're going to do a deeper dive. I cannot talk about the specifics of the murders, but I'm very excited and willing to analyze the chart, looking at from a scientific perspective, and the progress chart to the days of the murders, because we're going to not just see his chart. I don't want to just look at these killers' chart. There's a million channels out there like that, probably not a million, but there's a handful. I want to take y'all deeper and show you what astrology can reveal, what happened on those days. It's not just the natal chart that this triggered. So with the natal chart, we see what is set up, and we see that there's an 80% chance with this natal chart that things are not going to turn out right. He would have to have a perfect foundation of a home, at bare minimum, to probably even try to tip it to to get 10% of the light, a little bit better. But we're gonna go on a deep dive whenever my co-host comes on and can talk about some of the specifics of the murders, and then we'll look at the progress chart and the transits of that day as well. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful week, and you will hear from me soon. And I cannot wait to go on a deeper dive with this, and I will see you later. Bye.